Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So in the last episode, I did mention about the prompt journey. Now this is the response journey I will be talking about. Now in the prompt side of things, I did mention about a template and how a response get passed through the prompt and how the prompt template get initiated by the layer and how the information get masked before we send the data to an LLM outside the trust layer, right? Because obviously, Einstein trust layer plays a big role to make sure that the customer information is secure. Now, as long as so this is an impression that you might have that okay, so does that mean that data is not secure once we send out the data to LLM? No, that's not the case though, right? Because what normally happens. So obviously, I'm going to teach you this from Trailhead, right? Um, so we have as a part of this trust layer, right? Salesforce has an agreement with any LLM providers like OpenAI, for instance, that they will not be retaining any prompt or response as a part of training their models. Because usually, what happens if you look at you, I'm not sure if you know about OpenAI, they have a policy where you can retain your data for training for a certain period of time to ensure uh, you know the response is not generating any sort of toxicity. So if you look at OpenAI, that's chat, right? There's an option that where you can turn off the option to make sure that you're not helping OpenAI to train the model using their data. There's a tick box. So that's from an OpenAI perspective. But when we are dealing with Salesforce, right? Salesforce having interface or integration with different external LLMs. So Salesforce have an agreement in place that any kind of prompt which Salesforce sends to external LLM, right, to get the response back will not be saved or retained by an external LLM. That's very important, right? For instance, I work for government agencies, right? So if I have to recommend, say, an Einstein capability to the business who I do consulting as an architect, I have to make sure that we are taking care of the data privacy and our data is not used to train an external LLM without our consent. So without our consent, right? Um, Now, Salesforce ensures that uh, the agreement they have with any external LLM as a part of their Einstein suite, uh, they will not be retaining any customer data, right? Or any kind of prompt or any kind of response to train their model, which is very important, right? Because I don't want my business data to be utilized by OpenAI to train the model. That's exactly not what I want because there'll be a lot of sensitive information. Why do you want to train the AI, right? So that's where the zero retention policy comes into picture, right? So that's what zero retention means, the zero data retention. Any external LLM with Salesforce Engage has an agreement. That's what Salesforce says. I can't verify their statement. I mean, obviously, Salesforce is too big to lie about it, but if they do, I can't really verify that. They do say that they have an agreement with third-party LLMs like OpenAI or any other LLM providers to ensure that there's a zero data retention policy in place, which is good if that's the case, right? So now, how does the response journey works, right? So obviously, you get a response back from your LLM, and that response is not yet fully usable for, let's say, in our example, the customer agent to be um, uh, to help solve the customer query, right? Now, what normally happens, right? Once you get the response back, it enters back the trust boundary. That's the Einstein trust boundary. Now, once it's there, it does further checks, right? Toxicity check. Obviously, you don't want your response to be toxic in the sense should not contain any harmful sexual content, violence, right, or anything which is harmful to the agent as well as to the customer, right? So Salesforce has that toxicity check. So whatever response you're getting from LLM, right, it goes through that to ensure that you're only presented uh, with the data with the toxicity check, because if you have a very high toxicity, that data you shouldn't be using it. Yeah. And then there is and then there's something called data demasking. So what that means is that if you remember in the previous episode, I did mention about some of the customer personal identification information, PII, that needs to be masked before we send the data before we send it to LLM. So when you get a response back from LLM, right? So the data is still masked. It needs to be demasked to be useful. So right, so we have that. So I would say that Salesforce a trust layer has that component which use the tokenizer and existing tokens to demask it. And then we have feedback framework, which is not generally available, where you can give the feedback, right? If you have seen OpenAI sometimes have the feedback, right? Thumbs up, thumbs down. And in this case, you have the similar kind of approach, but at the same time, you will have an opportunity to provide with the feedback. And then you have an audit trail, right, which gives you information about every interaction from the first step, from data request to the response back. So that will be covered in details in audit trail. This is just to give you a transparency to the user, so that so that users are aware that their data is not being misused. So yeah, that goes to the simple response journey. This is a very simple, a tiny episode, but it's yet very important because you might get asked, right? Even if you don't get asked, right? Because my main intention is not to just teach you from an exam point of view, but just from a general knowledge perspective and how you can use AI in other activity, right? Even if you're trying to use Azure or let's say AWS or Google, right? If you're not using Salesforce, let's say, still this Einstein trust model kind of work, right? You should be asking, is my response getting checked through toxicity? How is the data unmasking happens? Is the data getting masked before you send it to LLM? Do you have a zero retention policy? These are I would say these components, right, can be part of a generic trust layer framework. Don't Not necessarily has to be uh, specific to Salesforce, but since we are talking about Einstein trust layer, right? So you can leverage this in other ecosystem. So that being said, I hope you guys have an amazing Friday. Adios.